When the night falls and the sounds of life gradually quiet down, it is also the time when the gate leading to the world of souls opens. There, stories buried in the darkness are whispered again. The unliberated ghosts, the cursed houses, the forests echoing the calls of the dead. The Vietnamese Ghost Stories channel is the place to awaken the primitive fear in each of us, with creepy slices of the past, chilling mysteries in everyday life, and vague calls from the invisible world. Are you ready to cross the boundary between reality and fantasy, where with just a light touch, the whole world will change color? Let's explore the top 5 best horror stories with the Vietnamese Ghost Stories channel. This happened when I was 13 years old. That summer, my mother invited the 3 of us, me, my younger sister, and my older brother, to spend the holidays at our maternal grandmother's house in a coastal rural area of Ben Tre province. At first, the plan was to rent a homestay near the beach for convenience, but when my grandmother heard about it, she insisted we stay at her place for the fun of it. The house was over 70 years old. My siblings and I weren't exactly excited, having heard creepy rumors about that house, stories about footsteps at night, whispers when no one was around, and all kinds of strange happenings. My mom brushed it off as nonsense, saying the neighbors made it up just to scare kids. She even promised that if anything weird happened, we would immediately move to Aunt Nam's place nearby. So our summer holiday began. We spent most days at the beach, wandering through the countryside market, buying souvenirs, eating grilled fish and fresh coconuts, and then returning to Grandma's house to lie in hammocks and enjoy the breeze. Until one night, the heat was unbearable, probably around 35 degrees Celsius, and the electric fans were useless. My mom suggested we sleep on the rooftop for cooler air. The rooftop was really just a small open-air room with no roof right on top of the house. We cleaned the floor, laid out mats, blankets, and pillows. My brother fell asleep first, then my sister, and finally me. At first, I slept deeply. The gentle breeze and quiet night quickly lulled me into sleep. That is, until I heard someone calling my name. The voice was soft and calm, but clearly calling me. I opened my eyes, sat up, and walked toward the door. I quietly asked, "Who's there?" But no one answered. I stepped into the narrow corridor and looked down the stairs. And what I saw next is something I've never told anyone before. At the bottom of the staircase, in the dim glow of a flickering fluorescent bulb, stood a girl in a white dress, staring up at me. But the horrifying part was her neck, tilted unnaturally far back, so much so that her face seemed pressed against the ceiling, blank and cold. Then, without a sound, she turned around and slowly walked away, her figure vanishing into the dark hallway. I stood frozen for minutes before quietly returning to my mat. I tried to force myself to sleep again, though my heart pounded in my chest. That night, I began to believe all the stories about this house. A week later, while sipping tea with my grandmother, I casually asked if anything had ever happened on the rooftop. She went quiet for a moment, then sighed and said, "10 years ago, there was a neighborhood girl named Lynn. She was only 12 when she jumped off our rooftop. Ever since then, some people say they still see her wandering that white hallway at night." A chill ran down my spine. I knew, without a doubt, the girl I saw that night was Lynn. Back when I was in 7th grade, our school organized a camping trip to Nam Jong, a mountainous area rumored to be cursed. Locals called it the Sacred Forest of Deadly Waters, and few dared to venture there at night. The campsite was nothing more than a few makeshift tents pitched in the middle of the woods, isolated and dim. Each tent held about 12 students, lined side by side on the damp, cold ground. I quite enjoyed the daytime activities, rafting with bamboo, playing soccer, and roasting sweet potatoes and marshmallows by the fire at night. When it was time to sleep, I chose the innermost corner of the tent. I opened my suitcase only to realize in horror that I had forgotten my pajamas. Left with no choice, I slept in my travel clothes and managed to doze off for about 3 or 4 hours. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly to the sound of rustling, something rummaging outside. Turning over, I saw 2 unnaturally tall figures crouching near my suitcase outside the tent. At first, I thought it might be someone getting up to go to the toilet, but the more I looked, the more I realized they didn't look human. They were extremely thin, hunched over, and so tall I could only see them from the waist down through the tent flap. I stared in horror. Even through the dim mesh, I could tell their skin was rough and gnarled, like rotting tree bark, cold and lifeless. And then, for some inexplicable reason, I blacked out, like someone had drugged me. The next morning, I was awakened by my phone's alarm blaring. The strange part was, I was sure I had turned it off before sleeping. And even stranger, phones were banned on the trip. No one knew I had snuck mine in. The ringing woke up everyone in the tent. Someone asked whose phone it was, and I pretended to still be asleep to avoid suspicion. But eventually, I had to get up. It was freezing even in the early morning. I went behind the tent to use the toilet. On my way back, I stopped dead in my tracks. Near the spot where I'd seen the 2 shadowy figures last night was a dead white rabbit, its body torn to shreds, blood soaking into the soil around it. I called a teacher who frowned and said it was probably a wild animal, promising to have the security team clean it up. All day I felt uneasy. I stayed in the tent, munching snacks, avoiding all activities. Dinner was a cold, dry cup of instant noodles. I forced it down just to eat something. Around 9 p.m., our teacher reminded us, if anyone needs to use the toilet tonight, make sure to go in pairs. The forest isn't safe after dark. I didn't think much of it, but chose someone just in case I needed a buddy. That night, I woke up again. Not from a nightmare, not because of that thing, but because I really had to pee. I tried shaking my tent mate awake, but they were out cold. Reluctantly, I snuck out alone. As I stepped out, I glanced at the stone benches by the fire pit, and I saw it. The creature was standing there, nearly twice the height of an average person. In its hand was something soaked in blood, covered in fur. It stood motionless like a statue, staring directly at me with sunken, pitch-black eyes. I froze. For what felt like several minutes, I just stood there, unable to breathe, unable to move. Then it shifted. One slow step forward. I panicked, turned, and sprinted to the toilet, trembling with every step. After a while, when everything outside seemed silent, I cautiously opened the door and peeked out. The stone benches were empty. The next morning, I wanted to tell my teachers and friends what happened, but the moment I tried to speak, it was as if my throat was being crushed. I couldn't say a word. Every time I tried, my ears rang, my vision blurred. Something was stopping me from telling the story. On the last night before we left, I secretly checked my suitcase. Buried among my clothes was a clump of white fur, soaked in dried blood. I knew instantly. It was the rabbit's fur from that night, and underneath it was a small old scrap of paper, scribbled in deep red ink. You saw me. I looked up, scanning the forest around the camp. The wind howled through the trees like the wailing of lost souls. The bus departed the next morning. I sat by the window, my mind blank. As the vehicle rolled past the edge of the forest, I took one last glance, and there it was, standing between 2 ancient trees, raising one long hand to wave goodbye. This happened about 2.5 years ago, when my husband and I were renting an apartment in an old residential building in District 8, Ho Chi Minh City. The building had about 8 floors, and we lived on the 4th. Everything started around the second month after we moved in. Every night at incredibly strange hours, sometimes exactly at midnight, sometimes at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., or even 5 a.m., the doorbell would ring. It was the kind connected to an intercom system, so we could talk to whoever was outside from inside our home. But the strange thing was, every time the bell rang, we never heard anyone respond. When we tried calling back through the intercom, there was no answer. About 5 minutes later, the bell would ring again. Some nights it rang 3 or 4 times, spaced an hour or 2 apart. We even called the local police to come check, but they never found anything suspicious. This went on for an entire month. We couldn't take it anymore and decided to move. This time we rented an apartment on the ground floor of the same building, thinking being closer to the ground might be more peaceful, but it wasn't. Less than 5 days after settling in, the doorbell rang again, this time right at 4 a.m. My husband checked the camera and rushed out immediately, but there was no one there. We called the police again, and once more, nothing. Not a soul in sight. From then on, every few nights the bell would ring. It felt like someone was playing a twisted game with us, or worse, watching our family. One time, the bell rang at 1 a.m. I turned on the intercom and suddenly heard heavy, raspy breathing, as if someone was standing right outside the door, refusing to speak. My husband, panicked, flung the door open. But no one. We called the police right away. They arrived in under 15 minutes, but again, nothing unusual. No signs, no sounds, only an eerie, suffocating silence. Whenever we told this story to friends or neighbors, they would shake their heads. Were you dreaming? You're just being paranoid. No one believed us. They thought we were imagining things or making it up to scare people. Until one night when my husband's close friend, Huang, came over. There was a great football match that night, so the 3 of us stayed up to watch. Around midnight, right at the peak of the game, the doorbell rang. My husband and Huang went to open the door, same as always. No one there. 30 minutes later, it rang again. This time, all 3 of us rushed out together, but the hallway was empty, just silent darkness. Suddenly, Huang's face turned pale. He quickly pulled us back into the room and slammed the door shut. After that night, he never dared come over late again. Then came one night in mid-May with the wind whispering softly through the door cracks. The doorbell rang again, this time around 1 a.m. I was too tired and annoyed, so I didn't bother to check. But then, we heard it again. A raspy, wheezing breath, so close it felt like it was right next to my ear. The breathing was broken, like someone had just run a long distance. My husband heard it too and ran to open the door. I followed him, heart pounding, the pale hallway light casting shadows on the stained walls. He opened the door, and again nothing but darkness. But then I saw it, a puddle of water on the floor, and reflected in that puddle was the image of a woman leaning against the wall. A horrifying figure in a red dress, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, bent 90 degrees. Then blood began dripping from her head onto the floor. We looked up, but there was no one at the wall. Yet the puddle still showed her standing there. I grabbed my husband's hand, it was ice cold, as he stared at the blood beginning to appear on the spot where the woman's reflection stood. Then, the woman suddenly raised her head upright, and we heard a crack, like a bone snapping, and she charged at us. My husband grabbed my hand and we ran back inside. Just as we slammed the door shut, we heard her scream from the hallway. Strangely, no one else in the building seemed to hear it. We locked the door tight and backed into the corner of the living room, collapsing onto the floor, hearts racing. Her scream slowly faded, replaced by an unbearable silence. I looked at my husband, about to ask something, when suddenly the lights went out. Only a faint light remained, illuminating a puddle of water that had somehow appeared inside the house. In its reflection, I saw her standing next to my husband, along with her 2 children. Back in middle school, I had a close friend named Hai. He lived in an old French-style 3-story house tucked away in a narrow alley in Ba Jin district, Hanoi. The house was big, aged, with thick walls, long hallways, and a musty scent that reminded me of a museum. I used to hang out at his place often, but one night I stayed over, and to this day I still can't forget what happened. That evening we stayed up late playing PlayStation in his room. Since I've always been into ghost stories, I brought up the topic and asked about his old, eerie house. Hai said he'd heard strange sounds at night too, especially around midnight, which is why he always made sure to sleep with the door shut. I asked what kind of sounds he'd heard. He said, "Around midnight I usually hear footsteps on the stairs. At first, they're slow, like a regular adult walking, but once they reach the top, it suddenly turns into the sound of someone sprinting straight toward my room. It's loud, clear, and it happens every time." He told me he'd never dared to open the door to see what was making the sound. I thought he was joking or trying to scare me, so Hai challenged me. "Leave the door open tonight and see if you can handle it." I agreed, nervous but curious. I told him I'd keep the door open the whole night to see what would really happen. Around midnight, all the lights in Hai's house were turned off. His parents and younger sibling were already asleep. The whole place felt strangely still, lit only by the dim glow of the bedside lamp. And then, I started to hear footsteps on the stairs. At first, I assumed it was someone in the house going to the bathroom. But then I remembered. The staircase was within full view from where I lay. There was no one there. Just darkness, empty space. But the footsteps kept coming, steady and deliberate, as if someone was ascending. Then the sound stopped, and immediately turned into the sound of someone running. Fast, heavy, rushing straight toward the open door in front of me. But there was still nothing there. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. On instinct, I leapt up and slammed the door shut with a loud bang, not daring to look out. The room fell into complete silence, except for my ragged breathing. Even now, after all these years, I can't forget that night. I still wonder, if it happened every night, then what was it that ran up those stairs, as if it were looking for someone? If I ever had the chance to relive that moment, maybe I'd leave the door open. Then again, maybe I'd do exactly the same thing. Near midnight, Duong stepped wearily into a run-down hotel by the side of a desolate road. Rain poured relentlessly, each drop pounding down as if trying to wash away every trace of life. A flickering neon sign reading vacancy cast a dim, eerie glow into the night sky. At the front desk, an elderly woman slid the key to room 34 toward Duong without saying a word. The room was every bit as terrible as he had expected. Peeling wallpaper, a stifling, musty stench, and a bed that looked anything but comfortable. He dropped his bag onto the floor and quickly noticed a window in the far corner of the room. It was sealed shut with a sign taped to the glass that read, "Do not open." Duong let out a cynical smirk and shook his head in disbelief. Despite the air conditioner humming, the room felt oppressively stuffy. Unable to bear it, he walked over to the window and tried to twist the handle. It wouldn't budge. Frustrated, Duong pulled a screwdriver from his bag and pried at the frame. The wooden edges creaked and groaned as though resisting him. Finally, the window slid open. A rush of cool air swept in, and Duong let out a relieved sigh. That's when he noticed something strange. The outer frame was lined with rusted, bent nails, hammered in from the outside, as if someone had tried to seal the window shut completely. A chill passed through him, but he brushed it off. "Probably just to keep out storm winds," he muttered. The next morning, while picking up a sandwich at the front desk, Duong casually mentioned the window. There was a sign that said, "Do not open on the window in my room." What's the reason? I turned on the AC, but it was too stuffy, so sorry, I had to pry it open. The woman froze. The faint smile on her lips vanished. You opened it?" she asked, voice trembling. "Yes," Duong replied with a frown. "It was nailed shut from the outside, too. Why would anyone do that?" Her face turned pale. She gripped a pen tightly on the desk, her voice barely a whisper. "Those nails weren't for keeping the storm out," she said. Duong squinted. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then leaned in close. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "A few months ago, a man stayed in that room. He had issues. One night, he opened that same window and jumped." She paused, her eyes flickering with fear. "After that, guests began reporting whispers. Some even said they felt someone pushing them toward the window. We couldn't afford to renovate, so we nailed it shut. Not to stop the window from opening, but to stop him from calling someone else." A cold dread swept through Duong's chest. "You're joking, right?" The woman said nothing. She simply closed her eyes and slowly shook her head. Duong hurried down the hallway, intent on grabbing his things and leaving. As he passed by the window, something in the glass reflection made him stop in his tracks. In the reflection, a man was standing right behind him, a pale face, a sagging jaw, sunken eyes glowing red. Two gnarled hands were clamped tightly on Duong's shoulders. He spun around. The hallway lights flickered, then went out. Thank you for joining us tonight and listening to these gripping, suspenseful, and truly captivating stories. We wish you a pleasant evening, a peaceful night's sleep, and a fresh, energized start to your day tomorrow. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next chilling tale.